attachment titles. I titled something 2020 today. Oops. All right, here we are, Tactical Tuesdays, June 8th. Let's go around and see what's going on. Aubrey, why don't you tell us how it's going with all the new folks?
I think that we're starting to get into a groove. A few people who didn't have the same developing experience of the other cohorts did come to the Monday office hours. And I think that they're on their way. And others have been kind of asking questions on the side. So we'll have some good questions for Teaching Tuesday too that they've got prepared that they've been working. So I'm excited about that. So I think that they're on their way. And I had also an idea for Teaching Tuesday if we have time without questions, just to show them how to push to a new repo, because we did push and pull from an existing one. But for anybody who's successfully gone through the Weaver, they don't have those skills. They have the documentation, but they don't know how to do it. So that was my idea just for Teaching Tuesday to fill some of the time. But other than that, I think that they're all on their own and they're doing great.
Good.
Yeah, and just on my independent work, I'm still working on trying to get all the way through the adult guardianship assistant. There's a lot of placeholders that are kind of jumbled. So I've been kind of working through that for the past 2 days still.
So we like to use this time to also sort of talk about bigger picture stuff. So do you see anything down the road that we need to get ahead of, or that you would like to get ahead of, that specifically with like an eye towards things that either affect the entire project or large swaths of things?
Yeah, I think this is way down the road, but just looking at testing and kind of revamping that and what we want to do with it. And I know that's a larger conversation, just how we were going to handle it. But I've started to kind of follow the matrix and scenarios loosely, trying to figure it out how to talk about it. Quentin, I was thinking that maybe we would connect on that and try to build out some of the materials based on your class, but in general, how we want to approach testing. But between there and where everybody is, there's a lot of steps that I'm kind of fielding questions to see how people end up right now.
Yeah, testing is one of those things everything is always something we can always improve on, but it's definitely one of those places where we historically have had our clearest direction. And I love that idea of that larger conversation, because I would like to figure out how we can formally add in, now that some of the automated testing is becoming more mature, how we can put that in the workflow. So that's really a thing for Michelle to talk about. So maybe what we'll do is we'll hold that as a discussion, and if we go through and everyone does their updates and we have time to talk, we can talk more about that. Because I don't think it's like we don't need to have it right now, but if we have time, let's try to get that going. All right, cool. Well then, Michelle, Tactical Tuesday.
Tactical. I think I'm all set tactically. Nothing like organized bad groups. I think, thoughts about adjustment to, or like additions to documentation and stuff, but yeah, I think that's it for now.
Right.
Would appreciate, I think, thoughts on sentences from people for the testing framework, but I know that that's not easy, so maybe we'll do that one of the deep dive Mondays or something.
I might be right from you. All right, Quentin.
Michelle didn't mention all the research that she did on figuring out a format for us to do some automated documentation. Not automated in that it writes itself, but that we can generate it
from a single source. Yeah.
Pulls the comments out. Yeah. So hopefully we'll have that set up. And Aubrey, we were thinking that your input would be really helpful to figure out ways to improve it when we have a little bit more to show. And I have been trying to, for a while, we've been like noodling around having a way to do kind of an administrative interview for some of the things DocAssembly built-in administrative interface makes kind of clunky. So I'm just trying to, I grouped those together under one menu item called dashboard. I'm going to try to build that out so it's a little bit more useful. So you can do things like someone calls and they say, oh, I couldn't submit my thing. How do I quickly jump to that person's interview? Which is like a really big pain. There's no built-in DocAssembly tools to do that. And other things like installing and updating packages where if you do it one at a time, it's very cumbersome. So it'll be room to expand and be a grab bag, I think, for a little while, but hopefully it will help us do all of our grunt work a little bit more accurately and with less effort.
Cool. Bryce, tactical, big picture stuff. Which I think the filing always sort of counts as big picture stuff. So
The what?
the e-filing always counts as big picture stuff. So, you know.
Oh, fair. Okay. I don't have like too many like actual, like at least a big picture updates there. I have been meaning to, and I need to reach out to Callie. I like have opened the Slack sometime like earlier, like last week and yesterday, with the intention of actually sending like a quick like, hey, this is what we're sort of like this is like a setup that we have. Like we're gonna take in some JSON that's gonna look like this. Like what I guess we would be asking them, not like I think we when we talked about it before, it was like we're not like trying to ask them to like either help out or like, hey, like what would work, or like what could y'all use now, but more of like I'm trying to make this extensible. Like, are there any additions that you think we should think about that would make it easier for us to integrate with A to J? But yeah, I haven't said that yet, and I'm just trying to think of ways to word it. Otherwise, no other big picture stuff.
Yeah, well, it can just be very casual. I think we decided to use Slack as the vehicle because we just want to sort of reach out and say, hey, on your dev side, what's the other things could be? What are things we should keep in mind? Time bombs we should avoid. All right, cool. Well, then I think that means we actually do have some time. We can look back and have some of that, a bit of a deeper discussion around testing and how we want to integrate it for, especially for this cohort and for folks going forward. So I think that it sounds like what we did do explicitly for bringing on this cohort, we very much based things on the documentation content that you put together in your class around scenario testing. And it sounds like, Aubrey, you were thinking about expanding on some of that. So Aubrey, do you want to sort of get us going in that discussion and point us in the direction, tell us what things you're seeing?
Sure. So I think that based off the documentation that you Quinta had for class, it really encourages an understanding of what is already pre-built for them versus like in what we used to call basic questions, which I'm sorry, what are we calling it now?
Still basic questions.
Okay,
I think the technical, the file is QL baseline, like question library baseline now, but
okay, question
yeah.
library. So not spending as heavy amount of time as we used to testing everything, kind of assuming that the question library is mostly tested unless it connects into questions that they've built, and really focusing on what the developers have built. So it really is the developers need to know their package well, and focusing on those questions in the matrix and kind of just thinking more about what should be happening, not necessarily every single way through, was what I read in the documentation, but then also kind of thinking of just little glitches, so if you have 5 options in an other, like we know that other can kind of work differently and then fill in differently. So we want to make sure that it all works, even if somebody's not going to be clicking every single thing on that page. So kind of a combination of like the substantive knowledge, who uses this form, but also the developer knowledge of how do things work behind the scenes. And kind of coming from both those angles when making their matrix was kind of the conversation that I had in my head when I was going through this for the first time. And I guess making sure that that is kind of the approach that we want.
I think that's a good summary. Yeah.
So I guess the question is like, what level do we want? Like, so we have ideally the developers writing scenarios, and we have writing these manual scenarios. And then we have people going through and doing the manual scenario testing. Where, and Michelle, I guess this is sort of a question for you and for Quentin. Where do we fit in the idea of writing automated scenarios?
I think because of this new discovery with proxy variables, I know everybody finds it confusing, but there's multiple categories of these variables. So we can work on the name, but I have to make sure, I have to build in a new feature basically to allow the developer to define proxy variables. And it was going to be part of my stand-up, but I've been writing tests for the existing steps because that really needed to get done a long time ago. So now those are more robust and more tested. I can make that sentence, including the proxy, the basically ID for the screen, and then with some, it's just not as clear this way. There's less clarity about how you should write your tests. There just is. So it will take some explanation. So first it'll take some testing to make sure we've got what we've got working, and then and some pretty robust testing at that. And then we can give a complicated explanation of how.
Okay, so it sounds to me like functionally what that's saying is, because if we're framing this with a discussion of the summer cohort and the people that are here now and what they're working on, that really we should keep focusing with the manual testing, and that we're not quite ready to sort of have them writing automated tests yet.
Not right now.
Yeah.
I suspect give me a week or two and I'll, have the next iteration ready to find the whatever comes up next. I don't know, but
There's a different part of the picture too, right? Which is that the automated tests are for catching regressions and changing code, and not as much like I have finished thing. Test all of the paths out. So like there's you need some way to figure out what paths to test, and the automated testing doesn't do that part for you. It's just like this path will work even if it is changed. I could.
That's what I was talking about with are we calling those scenarios for the automated tests too? Are those paths?
Those are scenarios, which is very convenient. But
I was just saying, we're basically talking about manual scenarios and automated scenarios, not scenarios that are automated, but writing of scenarios to say what the check meant.
I will say something that would be really easy to do is to install the testing framework and write one test that just starts the interview. And that way you at least know if the interview is running. So if we want that, we can do that.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Mm-hmm.
For the automated testing, is it automating is it running through it and seeing if your path works?
Mm-hmm.
Your path through, okay, so it's doing the manual like of the clicking and everything for you.
It
It's not,
tends to be a person, yeah.
okay, thank you.
Or it can also test if a validation you created will stop the user. So if you made a custom, validation, you can say, hey, did I get an invalidation message?
Okay,
Stuff like that. So there's more that will come someday if this doesn't get so complicated that a human can't use it. So we'll see.
And in theory, we should have, they're like, is it an oversimplification to say, well, I guess it is. 'Cause as soon as I was about to ask it, I realized that there were more than 2 bins, but the 2 large bins are basically those automated tests that can be something like just starting up to see if the program starts, which is sort of like a class of like, those could be automatically default on all new interviews. And then there's the ones that require you to define a path through your specific interviews. That's sort of like the rough division.
I mean, sure. There are 2 types of paths. One that is a step-by-step, one that matters what order you list it in, and one that is you just lay out what the variables need to be, and it will find its way. Does it get to the end, with those values? So it's more scenario-based than the step-by-step, linear.
I guess I'm just trying to see our end game. If it's to have certain things that everyone, when they make a repo and they put it and they check it in, basically it can then do a quick, like, it starts up, it does X, Y, Z. If you want the more thorough path, as Quinta was saying, like make sure that things continue to work after you change things, then you have to write out the scenarios. Like I'm just trying to think if there were 2 sort of, if that was like a division
Yeah.
of 2 that.
Yeah. I mean,
Michelle,
that's
It's not
really
all
low
handwritten,
hanging
right?
fruit.
Like
And then
scenario
everything else.
generation is partly automated too, right?
Not with the not now that we need to define the sought variable, because the JSON object does not say what the sought variable was for the values. So say you have children0.name.first, it doesn't tell you if the sought variable was children0, if the sought variable was children1. I mean, sorry.
Children I guess.
Yeah, like it doesn't. Yeah, that was a very bad example because that's nonsensical. But it just doesn't tell you what the sought variable was. So you can't know if the question was children0 or the question was children I. Even if the variable that you have is children0, the question might have had children I in it. And you can't know that from the JSON object. So in some simple situations, the generator will generate a table for you that you can just use. In our interviews, I believe we have questions that their complexity is such that you will not just be able to use the generator. We can try to customize it over time for complications we know exist and thus have a more robust generated interview, but we have complications. So, but it did have a generated test, and it can for simpler simpler interviews.
Michelle, I was going to say, at one point you had, I think you had talked about whether or not like sort of like fuzzing was useful. And I remember you saying it wasn't, but I don't remember why. Or not fuzzing, or at least just like randomly answering questions.
We're not randomly answering questions because we have enough validation needs, like things like the dates can't be before, the dates can't be in the future, the dates, various things like that. That there isn't a clear, like how many times do you fail the test before you say, okay, the test really has failed, it's not just a matter of random input, and how many times do people have to run that before, and how many people are going to experience false failures before they just don't do the tests anymore, like,
Fair,
depending on
okay.
the complexity of your validations.
I'm just going to give Catherine the heads up that, yes, you are in the right spot. What we do right before stand-ups is we have a management meeting. So you're always welcome to attend. But that's what we're just going to keep having that conversation.
It would be the same as the generator, basically. It would work for very simple interviews that didn't have like validation, where you could put in any dates and any numbers for a phone number and any number for a social security number and things like that. And then beyond that, it wouldn't function,
That
right?
might be a good tier 1 test.
Yeah, sorry, I was gonna say, I feel like there is like 2 different like way of things to actually, generally, like when you have testing frameworks, you can have either like the build is broken, i.e. like just it doesn't work at all, or you have like there's some business logic, which we in this case would be like validation's failing and we can't enter a valid date, or the date it makes you enter is nonsensical or something like that. And just because of how Python and DocAssembly works, it's really, really hard to sometimes get to like, oh, like it's broken, which on the user side would just be like you click and you try and file your PDF and you get to a complete error screen where like you can't do anything. And I don't know if y'all have different perspectives, but I feel like I feel like I've run more into just like, oh, random interviews are broken because of like something broke up, but like we changed something in like assembly line that wasn't reflected in the interview, or just like there's some missing variable that we don't have. And I feel like those we can catch a lot easier, even if we do random things, and we just make it so it passes a lot more maybe than it should, even if validation is broken and we can't get past a certain validation, as long as we don't hit an error screen, then like it's
Maybe
past it's not broken.
Maybe in the report we can say could not complete because of invalidation, user invalidation, invalid answers or something. And then only have errors, and that wouldn't be an error. And then only have errors for system errors.
Yeah, random could be,
and that way, so that
we could reduce the space of random too, so that I don't know that input validation errors would be that big of a class of problems if we can scope the valid range of answers a bit in our scenarios that we're randomizing among. I mean, I always thought that the idea would be like an ideal version of a test would be like, hey, we have 10,000 scenarios that are common for real people in the world, and let's run through them all. So it's like data representing people has pretty regular patterns, variables, like if it's asking for.
So you're saying defined randomness, not actual randomness, but like scoped randomness.
Well, randomness within a range. Like you don't have to necessarily have listed all of that out, but essentially just like a very large collection of scenarios that you can mix and match and pull from as appropriate for the interview without having to have written it for that specific interview.
I mean, maybe. We have some weird validations going on, but it could be for
that many validations, do we? I mean, we have like birth date stuff. So if you had a realistic range of birth dates, if it failed with a birth date that was less than 18, try one over 18, right? Like that's pretty much what you have to do there. If it says .ssn as the variable name, try a social security number, valid social security number format. So I think we could like special case some of the things that we do validate. I mean, I'm trying to think of what other kinds of validation we have.
Sometimes we have minimum checkbox, like you have to check a minimum, or like on the contact screen, you have to fill one of those, but none of them are required.
And that's like 3 choices though. Like that's like, I agree that the randomness wouldn't work if there's weird like interconnections between like multiple different variables on different screens that like all of a sudden doesn't work, and you'll end up with some weird failure at the end that no one would ever really enter. But like randomness is surprisingly good at like just finding the spread, and like it will try like a handful of like you can essentially like try like several different checkboxes like 5 different times on a screen, and one of them will likely be right and will go through.
Okay.
I'm not saying this is an easy thing at all, but I do think it's possible and could be worth trying someday. Like I've been thinking about that problem for like 2 years, and I haven't written any code for it. So,
Well, I think one of the questions I'm hearing here is like the goal of the testing, and it seems like there are different goals for different levels of testing. So it would be nice if we had like a thing that just like so if we don't marry ourselves to like the test has to do everything and catch all the stuff. If we think about it from an MVP standpoint, right? Like, are there like some things like Michelle, like you were saying, like, can we just see if it starts at the interview? If there's a universe of those things we can address with certain methods, I think that's worth pursuing as opposed to waiting till we have, the whole perfect interview.
Yeah, I think y'all have brought up some really good points about ways that we can approach randomness. I think we can give it a shot. I think I'm more comfortable with the thoughts y'all have brought up than with like conceptions we've thought of in the past, or at least that I've conceived of in the past. It will have to be definitely step by step, and I think I'd like to get this slot variable thing worked out first.
Yeah. No, I think
it's like
also
a ton of ranges of different things we can test, and they all have different values. So
yeah. Well, so there we go. Our discussion was a productive one because we sort of moved that forward, and then just to circle back to the original. I hate the cliche, but then it saves time. But then I spend more time talking about it.
Circle back.
We're circling back to the original question. Then for this cohort, we're gonna pause and wait for stuff for automated. So I think we're good. So Aubrey, I think that gives you what you are the part of your original conversation. For everyone who's just jumping on, just so you know, we have our management meetings right before the stand-up on Tuesdays. You're always invited. So you being here and listening is fine. I just wanted you to understand, like, you aren't late for anything. You just came in on another meeting that happens in the same place. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording the Tactical Tuesday meeting, and then we'll start recording the stand-up, and I'll let Aubrey